Relax and listen to the voice. Smiley Face. One night, a teenage girl went to a nightclub with her friends. They had a great time, drinking and dancing, and it was 3 a.m. by the time that they'd left. Her friends lived in the city, but the girl lived out in the suburbs. They said goodbye and went back to their apartment, leaving the girl to make her own way home. Unable to get a taxi, the teenage girl decided to walk home on her own. On the way, she had to cross through a park. It was very dark, and all she could hear was the clacking of her heels echoing in the night. She thought she saw something moving in the bushes, so she quickened her pace. Suddenly, a man appeared from behind a bush and blocked her path. His face was hideous. It looked terribly scarred and misshapen. She tried to run, but he cornered her, and he grabbed hold of her arms. The frightened girl pleaded for her life and tearfully asked to be let go. The man's deformed mouth twisted into a leering grin. "Do you want death or smiley face?" he asked. "Please just let me go," she cried. "Death or smiley face," he insisted. The girl didn't know what he meant. "Smiley face," she replied. Without a word, he pulled out his knife and sliced the corners of the girl's mouth up to her ears. Her face was left completely deformed. She was scarred for life. Whenever people saw her in public, they said that she resembled a grotesque smiley face. Skinned Tom. Have you seen the ghost of Skinned Tom? Bloody red bones with the skin all gone. Oh, wouldn't it be chilly with no skin on? In rural Tennessee, there lived a young man named Tom. He was handsome, witty, charming, and athletic. What's more, Tom had an eye for the ladies, and few could resist his charms. Every girl in town eventually fell for Tom's good looks, but he was never satisfied. As soon as he had romanced one girl, he would break up with her and move on to the next. Before long, Tom had dated almost every single girl in the area. In search of more romance, Tom moved on to new pastures and began driving to the next town over, hoping to meet more girls. Soon, he came across a beautiful young lady named Eleanor. She had long blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and a curvaceous figure. Tom was smitten with Eleanor, and they began dating. There was just one problem. Eleanor was already married. But Tom didn't let that deter him. In fact, he enjoyed the excitement of sneaking around and having an affair with a married woman. The pair would often meet late at night in the local lover's lane and make out in Tom's car. Tom and Eleanor made little effort to keep their fling a secret, and before too long, the folks in town began to gossip. Eventually, her husband got wind of what was going on, and he was driven insane with jealousy. He vowed to get revenge on the two of them. He told his wife he was going out of town for the weekend, then hid in the woods behind their house. As he'd guessed, that evening, Tom showed up to take the lady out. The husband followed them to the nearby lover's lane. Tom and Eleanor were locked in a passionate embrace when all of a sudden they heard the car door open. Standing there was Eleanor's husband. His face was twisted in an evil grin, and in his hand he was clutching a hunting knife. Tom was scared out of his wits, and he began begging for his life. He swore up and down that he didn't know Eleanor was married, but the husband didn't believe him. The wronged husband grabbed Tom by the ankles and dragged him out of the car, still bearing a sadistic grin upon his angry face. "Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me," begged Tom. "Oh no," said the husband. "I'm not going to kill you. I have something far worse in mind." With that, the husband dragged Tom off into the darkness. Cowering in the car, Eleanor couldn't see what was happening, but she was forced to listen to Tom's blood-curdling screams as they pierced the dark Tennessee night. Finally, after what seemed to be hours, her husband emerged from the darkness. His clothes were covered in blood. Without a word, he climbed into the car and drove to the local police station, where he turned himself in. The next morning, the police drove up to the crime scene and made a horrifying discovery. Hanging from the branches of a tree was a pile of human skin. They realized that the husband hadn't killed Tom, he had skinned him. In fact, the jealous man had skinned Tom so deftly and carefully that Tom was still alive at the end of the ordeal. The husband then draped Tom's hide over a branch and left him for dead. The police searched the area, but Tom was nowhere to be seen, and they could find no trace of the hunting knife either. They say that Tom still lurks around the Lover's Lane, waiting to catch a cheating couple and teach them the same lesson he learned that fateful night. Once a handsome young man, he's now just a bloody skeleton, stalking the little alleys and laneways with a big hunting knife clutched in his bony fingers. All of the teenagers in Tennessee are warned by their parents. Don't go to the Lover's Lane if you don't want to be Skin Tom's next victim. Springhill Jack. Rumors about a monster named Springhill Jack began to circulate in London towards the end of 1837. Young women were being attacked by a hideous and repulsive creature who sprang out of the shadows and breathed flame from his mouth. He would assault them and scratch them with his sharp claws before disappearing into the night. Some witnesses claimed that he had wings like a bat and horns on his head like a devil. They said that he had terrible protruding eyes and a ghoulish laugh. People gathered together and formed vigilante groups, patrolling the streets at night in an effort to catch him. The police did not take these reports very seriously until Springhill Jack began attacking in London. One night in February of 1838, a young woman, Jane Alsop, was spending a quiet evening at her home with her family when she heard someone knocking violently on the front door. When she opened the door, Jane saw a tall man standing in the shadows near the front gate. It was a foggy night, and thus so she couldn't make out his face. "I'm a police officer," he said. "For God's sake, bring me a light, for we have caught Springhill Jack on the lane." Jane ran to fetch a candle, but when she gave it to the man at the gate, he held it up to his face, and she realized the terrible mistake she had just made. In the dim light, she saw the hideous features of Springhill Jack himself. As Jane screamed, the creature vomited forth a huge amount of flame from his mouth. Then he grabbed her and tore at her clothes with his sharp claws. She tried to get away, but the man caught her and continued his attack. Jane's family heard her screams, and they ran out into the street to help, but Springhill Jack hurried away and disappeared into the night before anyone else could get a good look at him. Jane described her inhuman attacker to the police, saying that he wore a tight oilskin suit and a kind of close-fitting helmet on his head. It appears wearing a helmet and a bright white suit, he attacked the girl with metal claws, tearing at her dress. A few nights later, an 18-year-old girl named Lucy Scales was walking home with her sister. As they passed a dark alley, a tall, cloaked figure suddenly jumped out of the shadows and attacked Lucy. He spat blue flames into her face, blinding her, and as she lay writhing on the ground, Springhill Jack calmly turned around and melted back into the shadows. When news of the attacks got out, panic spread over the city of London. In October of 1837, a girl by the name of Mary Stevens was walking home after visiting her parents. On her way through Clapham Common, a strange figure leapt out of her from a dark alley. He held her in a tight grip, completely immobilizing her, and he began to kiss her face. Then he started ripping at her clothes and scratching her with his claws. She said his hands on her flesh felt as cold and clammy as those of a corpse. In a panic, Mary screamed, and her attacker quickly fled the scene. During the commotion, several residents launched a search for the mysterious Springhill Jack, but he could not be found. As these stories multiplied, people demanded that the police protect them. The most terrifying thing about the whole mystery was that no one knew for sure when he would strike again. As time went on, the reports of Springhill Jack's appearances became less and less, and he evolved into a figure of folklore, Authors would write stories about his exploits, and the public would read them with excitement. The Black-Eyed Children. The urban legend began in 1996 when a man named Brian Bethel from Abilene, Texas, claimed he had an encounter with two very strange children. One night he was getting into his car, which was parked outside of a movie theater, when two young boys approached and knocked on his window. The man rolled down his window, but he got the strangest feeling that something wasn't quite right. "Hey, mister, we have a problem," said the older boy in a calm voice. "You see, my friend and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money. We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?" There was something about the two pale boys that scared the man, and he hesitated. "Come on, mister, let us in. We can't get into your car until you do, you know," the boy said soothingly. "Just let us in and we'll be gone long before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house." For the first time, the man noticed their eyes. They were as black as coal. There was no pupil and no iris, just two completely black eyes. As if sensing the man's unease, the boy said, "Come on, mister, we won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun." The man was frightened, and he just started the car and threw into reverse. The boy shouted, "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in." The man drove off, but when he looked back, he saw that the boys were gone, and that the sidewalk outside the movie theater was deserted. The story was originally posted on the website called Obi-Wan's UFO-Free Paranormal page, and ever since then, people have been reporting encounters with similar black-eyed children. All of the encounters seem to take place at night, when the person is alone in their home or in their car. The children's faces are usually partially obscured by hoodies or hats, and the people report a strange sense of unease or foreboding. When the people notice their black eyes, the children become insistent and aggressive, and when they can't get into the house or car, they mysteriously disappear. Gore Orphanage. The legend of Gore Orphanage begins with a married couple named Johann and Katharina Sprunger who lived in Indiana. After their young son and daughter died under mysterious circumstances, Mr. and Mrs. Sprunger decided to start an orphanage. They called their orphanage the Light of Hope Orphanage. Unfortunately, it burned down in 1899, and 3 orphan girls were burned alive in the blaze. Putting this tragedy behind them, the Sprungers moved to Vermilion, Ohio, where they started a new orphanage in 1903. This was called Gore Orphanage, and eventually they had over 100 boys and girls living there. But all was not well with the children of Gore Orphanage. Rumors of darkness and despair soon plagued the place. The children told horrific stories of abuse, neglect, and slave labor. Mrs. Sprunger's cooked cows' heads and lungs and forced the children to eat the foul meat or starve. Mr. Sprunger beat the poor kids with a leather strap until their bodies were covered in bloody welts and bruises. He would also rent out the children to local farmers as slave labor. The boys and girls were only allowed to wash themselves once every 2 weeks, and they all had to use the same bath and dirty bath water. The children's rooms were infested with rats which crawled into their beds and bit them while they lay sleeping. Soon, the terrified children began trying to escape Gore Orphanage. Some of them managed to run away from the home, wading through the Vermilion River and finding refuge with some generous people in Vermilion. One cold night in December 1923, the orphanage caught fire. Nobody knows how the blaze started. Some people say that one of the orphans accidentally knocked over an oil lamp. Others say Mr. Sprunger started the fire because he hated the children and wanted to collect insurance money. The dreadful cries and screams of the children trapped inside the blazing building could be heard by horrified onlookers. The deadly fire continued to burn until the screams finally fell silent, and the orphanage was reduced to a charred, smoking shell. The blaze had claimed the lives of over 100 poor orphan children. Ever since that night, people have seen strange apparitions and ghostly figures lurking in the field where Gore Orphanage once stood. They say that if you go there late at night, you can still hear the sounds of children screaming and pleading for help. The air is still filled with the smell of burning flesh and roasting children. Despite the fact that the site is now a vacant field, many people have heard the sound of doors opening and shutting and footsteps walking across wooden floors. There's also an old tire swing hanging from a tree near the site, where they say you can see a ghostly young boy swinging silently back and forth. The Stair. A girl was sitting on the subway late one night, and she noticed that the woman sitting across from her was staring intently at her. The woman was sitting between two old men. The girl kept looking away, but the woman wouldn't break eye contact with her. The staring woman was beginning to freak the girl out a little bit. At the next stop, a new passenger got on. It was a tall man in a gray trench coat. He sat down next to the girl. The woman paid no attention to the man in the trench coat. She just kept staring at the girl, who was getting more and more creeped out as time went on. The two old men didn't even glance in her direction. She pretended not to notice, but each time she glanced at the strange woman, the stare continued. When the train was pulling into the next stop, the man in the trench coat got up to leave. Suddenly he grabbed the girl's arm tightly, and as the doors opened, he dragged her off of the train. The subway door shut, and the train pulled off, leaving the girl alone on the platform with the man in the trench coat. She panicked and started screaming for help. Calm down, said the man. I just saved your life. I didn't mean to scare you, but I had to get you off that train. That woman that was sitting across from you, she wasn't just staring at you. She was dead. Those two old men were transporting her, and they were propping up her dead body. The Devil's Tower. In Alpine, New Jersey, there's a large Gothic stone tower. Locals call it the Devil's Tower. According to legend, it was built in the early 1900s by a plantation owner named Manuel Rionda. He built a large mansion for his wife, and he also built her the tower so she could look out over the New York City skyline. One night, his wife was looking out of the tower when she saw Manuel with another woman. The wife was so distraught to discover that her husband was cheating on her, and she immediately jumped off of the tower and fell to her death. Manuel was devastated and racked with guilt, and he had the mansion demolished. The tower was supposed to be torn down as well, but the plans had to be scrapped when several workmen mysteriously fell to their deaths. Manuel just moved away and left the tower locked up and abandoned. Rumors began to circulate that the tower was haunted, and many people reported hearing strange noises as they passed by. Others spotted a shadowy female figure lurking in the tower's windows. They say that if you go there at night, you might catch a glimpse of the ghostly apparition of the wife jumping from the tower, or hear her disembodied screams as she plunges to her death. As the years went by, locals started calling it the Devil's Tower, and they said it was cursed. According to legend, if you walked backwards around the tower 6 times at midnight, the devil would actually appear. The members of a strange and twisted satanic cult became obsessed with the Devil's Tower, and they congregated there at night to hold black masses and worship the devil. They also carried out bloody rituals in which they would sacrifice animals in honor of the devil. During the day, children who lived in the area would find the gory remains of disemboweled cats and dogs. The leader of the satanic cult had a very special sacrifice planned for Halloween night. He wanted his followers to murder an innocent young girl and offer her soul up to the devil. The crazed cult members began staking out the local high school, searching for a victim. They set their sights on a teenage girl named Laura, who happened to be the homecoming queen. When Halloween arrived, the cult members were waiting outside the high school in a black van. After classes ended, they watched Laura say goodbye to her friends and start walking home alone. Driving very slowly, they followed her in the van, making sure to keep their distance. Just before Laura reached her home, the black van suddenly sped up and swerved in front of her, blocking her path. The doors flew open and the cult members jumped out. They grabbed the frightened teenage girl and threw her into the back of the van. After tying her hands and feet with rope and gagging her with a dirty cloth, the van sped off again. That night, while trick-or-treaters went from door to door collecting candy, the police went from door to door asking if anyone had seen Laura. Nobody knew what had happened to her. Her worried parents combed the streets, but they couldn't find any trace of her. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The next morning, some kids who were playing near the Devil's Tower stumbled across a horrible scene. Inside, the walls were splattered with blood. What remained of Laura's mutilated body lay on a cold stone slab. Her heart had been cut out, and her internal organs were scattered around on the floor. The police searched everywhere for the members of the satanic cult, but they were nowhere to be found. Not one of the cult members was ever seen alive again. Ever since that day, they say that if you go to the Devil's Tower on Halloween night, you will see the frightening apparition of a young girl dressed in a bloody gown emerging from the mist and begging for someone to save her. Luxury Hotel. A mother and daughter were traveling together in Europe. When they arrived in Paris, they booked into a luxury hotel. The mother was feeling quite poorly and decided to go to bed early. The daughter was a little worried and sent for the hotel doctor, who examined the mother and wrote out a prescription. The daughter then set out into the city to find a pharmacy and buy the medicine for her mother. What should have been a simple errand ended up taking the daughter almost 4 hours, mainly because she spoke little or no French. She searched the entire city and eventually managed to find a pharmacy that was still open. Finally, the frustrated daughter arrived back at the hotel with the medicine, only to discover her mother's room was completely empty. It was as if her mother, and any trace of her mother, had just vanished into thin air. In fact, the hotel room looked completely different. The carpet, the wallpaper, and the curtains all had different patterns. The bed was made and looked as if it had never even been slept in. All of their luggage was nowhere to be found. When the confused daughter stopped the cleaning lady in the corridor and asked her where her mother was, she was met with a blank stare. In fact, all of the hotel staff denied ever seeing the mother and daughter before. The hotel manager even said he had no record of them ever checking into the hotel. At this point, the daughter became frantic, and she fled to the embassy, where she was greeted by sympathetic officials who wouldn't believe her story. Instead, they doubt that her mother ever existed and decide that the daughter must be crazy. Trapped in a nightmare, the young girl ended up being sent to a mental hospital, where she died years later, utterly and completely insane. The bus driver. There was a bus driver who worked for the county hospital. One day, he was transporting 20 dangerous mental patients to the state insane asylum. On the way, he got thirsty and decided to stop for a few drinks at a bar. When he got back to his bus, he was shocked to find it empty. The mental patients had somehow managed to get free, and all of them had escaped. Worried that he would lose his job, the crafty bus driver came up with an idea. He drove the bus down the road and pulled over at the first bus stop he found. He opened the doors, and all of the people waiting there got on the bus. The bus driver took them to the insane asylum and told the staff that these patients were especially violent and had to be restrained immediately. It took many months before the staff of the insane asylum realized their mistake. By that time, many of the people had actually gone insane. The majority of the real mental patients still, to this day, have never been found. The Blind Maiden. There's a new urban legend that has been circulating in schools all over Spain. In whispers and rumors, people are talking about a strange website called the Blind Maiden. This legend is almost totally unknown outside of Spain. It was only brought to my attention by a Spanish friend of mine. They say that most of the time, the website is offline and you cannot access it, no matter how hard you try. However, according to the rumors, there are 3 rules you must obey in order to even access the website. Rule number 1, you must be all alone. Rule number 2, you must turn off all the lights in your house. Rule number 3, you must go to the website exactly at midnight on a moonless night. If you satisfy all these conditions, you will apparently be granted access to the Blind Maiden site. Once inside, your eyes will immediately be assailed by a never-ending montage of shocking and screaming faces. The pictures are of boys and girls. Their faces are twisted in tremendous fear. Their mouths frozen in a silent scream. Their eyes are missing. The pictures are displayed quickly, flashing up on screen one after the other, with no explanation. According to the legend, some lines of Spanish text will appear on the screen. Roughly translated, the text reads something like this. This website will take you to a whole new level of horror. A horror that will use all 5 of your senses. You must be very careful not to click on anything by accident. You will be faced with the real experience of absolute horror. Click the accept button to engage actively in the experience. Below that last text are 2 buttons. Accept and decline. At this point, you'll probably be very curious. You'll probably find yourself tempted to click the accept button. Don't. If you accept the challenge, you will only be taking your life in your hands. Please, click decline and stay safe. This is what is supposed to happen if you click the button and accept the challenge. To your surprise and horror, you observe on your monitor a sinister silhouette walking towards your home. You want this to just be a nightmare. You want to wake up. You watch as the specter approaches and enters the same room where you are sitting. You'll see, on your monitor, your own back. Then you will feel a presence behind you. You'll feel a tap on your shoulder. The last thing you see before you die will be the face of the Blind Maiden staring mercilessly at you with her horrible eyes. According to what I have been able to research, they say the Blind Maiden will rip out your eyes and take a snapshot of your face so that you will be forever a part of the website's picture gallery. Are you willing to take the risk? The choice is yours. As I said earlier, I found out about the Blind Maiden website from a friend of mine who lives in Spain. I don't know whether or not this urban legend is true. As far as I know, the legend is currently unknown outside of Spain. Honestly, I've not yet attempted to find the website. Yeah, I admit it, I'm a little bit too afraid, but I'll pass the challenge on to you. Do you dare to check it out? Is the urban legend true or false? Simply a harmless collection of images and web pages, or is it a horrible reality? Here's a rough English translation of a comment from a Spanish boy who claims to have accessed the website. Blind Maiden, or La Doncella Ciega, or El Ciego del Soltera, whatever you want to call it, this urban legend is real, and I almost suffered the consequences of messing with that crazy site. The story is that there is a web page which you can only enter if you're totally alone with all the lights off in your home, exactly at midnight on a moonless night. After that, whatever you do, don't click where it says accept the challenge, because when you do this, you will die, probably within minutes. I didn't take this advice. I did the opposite and totally accepted the challenge. Right at that moment, I clicked the button. Everything I saw on the screen became so real. I saw a shadow walking towards a place that seemed to be my home, and I saw it walk to where I was. I was paralyzed by fear and I couldn't move a muscle. Then it came to the door and began to open it. Right then, I turned around and saw the door behind me opening, and then I see this face that was indescribable, but it had no eyes. Then it came closer, and I heard it whispering something I couldn't understand, and the face changed and became gruesome and with an expression of terror that I'll never forget. I ran with everything I could, and I tripped over something on the floor, and I hit the edge of my study table, and I fell unconscious. It seems she must have thought I was dead, because thanks to that, I survived. Never again in my life will I play with that supernatural, and I'll never underestimate its power. And there you have it. Blind Maiden is a scary urban legend from Spain, all about a bizarre website that offers you the ultimate horror experience. Unfortunately, for some, it seems that the experience can prove to be lethal. Soap Sally. There's a legend in some regions of Appalachia about Soap Sally. Some people say she's an old woman who wears too much makeup, and others say she's an old man trying to pretend he's an old woman. According to the legend, Soap Sally stalks the area at dusk, looking for children who have run away from home. She grabs them by the hand in a death-like grip and leads them off, and nobody ever sees them again. People say she grinds up their bodies and turns the children into soap. There's a special kind of soap called lye soap, which was made years ago from the fat and bones of animals. Soap Sally uses the fat and bones of children to make her own special brand of lye soap. Some even say that she's made the soap in shapes so as to resemble children's hands. And when she's done, they say she sells the soap to the parents of the missing children. The parents never realize that they are washing themselves with the remains of their own children. Under the bed. A family went on vacation together and checked into a suite at a cheap old hotel. They booked 2 double rooms, one for the husband and wife and one for their children, a boy and a girl. When they got to their room, they both detected a bad odor. The husband called down to the front desk and asked to speak to the manager. He explained that the room smelled very bad and that they would like another suite. The manager apologized and told the man that they were all booked because of a convention in town, but he said he was going to send a maid up to their room to clean and try to get rid of the odor. After lunch, the family went back to their rooms. When the kids walked into their room, they could both still smell the same odor. Again, their father called the front desk and told the manager that their room still smelled really bad. The manager told the man that there was nothing he could do. So the kids had to spend the night in the room. The girl and the boy held their noses, trying not to breathe in the stink. Eventually, they got to sleep, and in the morning, their parents were knocking at the door to wake them up. When they opened the door, their father smelled the stink and decided he had to get to the bottom of what was causing this horrible smell. So he started searching the entire room for the source of the bad odor. He sniffed the towels, took down the curtains, and checked on the carpet. The kids helped out too, checking the bedclothes and the mattress. As he pulled the top mattress off the bed, the young boy saw there was a big hole in the box spring base underneath. He looked down into the base of the bed and came face to face with a horrible sight. There, lying curled up inside the base, was the dead body of a woman. The boy realized that he had slept all night just a few inches away from a rotting corpse. The Wild Rose. Many years ago, in Ireland, there was a young woman named Eliza Day. People called her the Wild Rose because they said she was as beautiful as the wild roses that grew down by the river, all bloody and red. One day, a young man came into town, and from the first moment he set eyes on Eliza Day, he knew she was the one. He went to her house, knocked upon her door, and introduced himself. He took her in his arms and kissed her ruby red lips. On the second day, the young man came back. He brought her a single red rose and told her she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. He asked her to meet him down by the river where the wild roses grew, so sweet and scarlet and free. On the third day, he took her down to the river. She stood on the bank and gazed silently into the water. The man kissed her lips one last time. Then he waited until her back was turned, and he beat her to death with a rock in his hand. As he killed her, he whispered, "All beauty must die." He placed a rose between her teeth and slid her body into the river as she slowly disappeared beneath the clear, calm surface. Her body was never found, and over the years, her real name was forgotten. She was just referred to as the Wild Rose. Many people claim to have seen her ghost wandering along the banks of the river where the wild roses grow. Her head is dashed in, and blood is running down her face. They say that she clutches a single red rose in her hand. Polybius. Back in the 1980s, if people wanted to play computer games, they had to go to arcades that had standalone arcade machines. The Polybius game was supposedly released in 1981 to arcades in Portland, Oregon. The machines were completely black, and the only decoration was the name Polybius in bright letters at the top. There was just a button and a joystick used for gameplay. They say it was a puzzle shoot-'em-up game, somewhat like Tempest, where you move a rotating ship around the screen and shoot to destroy all the enemies. Polybius supposedly became very popular. It was extremely addictive, and people would form long lines waiting to play it. However, there was something sinister about the game. Players reported experiencing strange things such as hearing the sound of a woman crying and seeing grotesque faces out of the corner of their eyes. Some saw disturbing subliminal messages flashing up on the screen saying things like, "Kill yourself." After playing the game, people would have horrible nightmares, waking up in a panic. Others experienced extreme nausea, convulsions, and vomiting. Others got headaches, blackouts, hallucinations, or even developed amnesia. Some unlucky people even committed suicide. According to one owner of an arcade, mysterious men in black suits would often come to collect records from the game. They did not collect any money, just data on gameplay, and in some cases, they would change the settings. Because of this, the leading theory is that it was some sort of government experiment using subliminal messages to brainwash people and control their minds. The game remains in obscurity because about 1 month after its release, all of the cabinets suddenly disappeared. One cabinet reappeared in an arcade in 1998, but quickly disappeared again. While some people have tried to recreate the game, no one has ever found the original ROM. It was supposedly created by a mysterious company called Sinneselation, which in German roughly translates to sense deletion, or a deletion of the senses. Chicken dinner. One evening, a mother and father were invited to a party. They couldn't get in contact with their usual babysitter, so they decided to ask their next-door neighbor, an older lady, to take care of their 6-month-old baby son. The old woman said she would be delighted to help them out. They told her they needed to leave by 8 p.m., but when the time came, the old woman had still not shown up. The husband gave her a phone call and asked her what was taking her so long. "Oh, I'm sorry," said the old woman. "I forgot all about it. I'll come over right now." When the old woman came to the door, the mother and father were already making their way to the car. They gave the old woman instructions to put the baby to bed at 9 p.m. and to put a chicken in the oven so that it would be cooked for the next day's dinner. While the couple were at the party, the mother decided to phone home and check on the babysitter. When the old woman answered the phone, the mother asked if she had put the baby to bed yet. "Oh, I'm sorry," said the old woman. "I forgot all about it. I'll do it right now." "And have you put the chicken in the oven?" asked the mother. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said the old woman again. "I forgot all about that too. I'll do that right now." The mother just rolled her eyes and hung up the phone. She couldn't really complain because the old lady was babysitting for free. After the party, the mother and the father drove home, and when they opened the front door, the old lady was there to greet them. They thanked the old lady for taking care of their baby, and she went on her way back home. The mother decided to go upstairs to check on the baby, but when she walked into the child's bedroom, she was shocked to see an uncooked chicken lying in the baby's crib. The Runaway Bride. A few years ago, a young man and his new bride went to Paris for their honeymoon. While the happy couple were wandering around the city, taking in the sights, they decided to do some shopping. The wife went to a trendy clothes shop and tried on several dresses, while the husband waited outside the dressing room. After a long time had passed and the wife didn't come out, the husband began to wonder what was taking her so long. He asked one of the female shop assistants to go into the dressing room and tell his wife to hurry up. The assistant came out and said that his wife wasn't in there. In disbelief, he checked it himself and found the dressing room completely empty. They searched the entire shop, but could find no trace of her. The husband thought that his wife must have been playing a practical joke on him, so he returned to their hotel room and waited for her, but his wife never showed up. As the hours passed, he became more and more anxious. When she had not returned by the following morning, he was distraught and contacted the Paris police. Within 48 hours, all of the Parisian authorities were looking for the missing American bride. They issued a description of her to the radio stations and TV news channels. She was described as a tall American woman, 24 years old, with a birthmark on her left cheek. It seemed as if everyone in Paris was on the lookout for the missing woman, but to no avail. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The police did what they could, but after 3 weeks they gave up on their search. The husband began to suspect that his bride had second thoughts about their marriage and must have simply run away and left him. 6 months later, exhausted and depressed, the husband finally left Paris and returned to the USA. As the months turned into years, the man had given up on finding his beautiful wife, but his life had totally fallen apart. He was so filled with grief that he was unable to hold a job or go on with his life. He took to wandering aimlessly from place to place, country to country, letting fate take him where it may. 2 years later, he found himself in the Philippines during a carnival. He stopped in front of a freak show in a shabby old tent. The sign above the entrance read, "The House of Oddities." Curious, the man entered and was disgusted at what lay within. Crouched in cages, he saw a collection of hideously deformed freaks. The bizarre denizens were terrifying examples of human misery. In the last filthy cage, he was horrified to see the featured attraction, a twisted, scarred, and mutilated woman rocking back and forth and groaning strange animal-like noises. The sign on her cage read, "The Worm Woman." She had no arms or legs. They had been hacked off and just her torso remained. Her face was covered with jagged scars from horrible operations, and her mouth was sewn shut. As she turned her sad eyes up to look at him, the husband screamed as he recognized the birthmark sitting on the cheek upon the face of his long-lost wife. The 7 Gates of Hell. Some say on Halloween night, if you go past 7 black gates, you will see the 7 gates of hell. I thought it was a myth at first, until I tried it out. I went past 7 black gates around my neighborhood, then I went to sleep. My dreams were of a furious fire. It stopped, and there was a man, tall and bulky. His eyes were rather splinted, showing his age, and his legs and hands were thin and looked as if they could barely support his weight. He spoke with a scratchy and dying tone, saying, "Nemo clu ot et neves seta govela." Chuckling, he opened the gate. My whole body became numb, and I was unable to fight it as it moved on its own. Without any control of myself, I went through the first gate. In the first gate, I saw fire and corpses that were horribly mutilated, desecrated and burnt. They were sobbing so loudly that I couldn't even hear the crackles of fire. One came to me, with one eye and bullet holes all over him. He said, "We are the desecrated corpses who did not get a proper burial. We are to stay here until the judgment day." I went past him into the second gate. It was in a building. Upon entering gate 2, I was in a dungeon. There were people tied up, screaming in pain. One was being sawed in half very slowly, his body repeatedly healing, ready to be sawed open again. Another was in an Iron Maiden, with the door being opened and closed, but never causing any visible harm. A man in an executioner's mask said to me, "We are the torturers tortured by our own devices." I went past him to the exit, towards the third gate. When I entered gate 3, this time I was in a forest. It was silent, except for a few yells. There was a man hanging from a noose. Another man fell off of a cliff, reappeared, and then fell off again. I began running away from a horribly burnt woman chasing after me. I already knew what this one was. These were the people who committed suicide. I ran through the fourth gate, which was in a palace. In gate 4, suddenly I was in the palace, surrounded by emperors, politicians, and really wealthy people. An emperor was being gnawed on by lions. When the lions ripped a limb off or slashed him, the appendages grew back and the injury healed. A politician was being beaten by what looked like shadows in prisoners' clothes. A man in a suit came to me and said, "We're the corrupted people, the people who used our power to help ourselves instead of others." I then walked to the next gate, the 5th. Gate 5 was in another room. There was a man tied up on a bed, being lashed by floating spiky leather whips. A woman was being burnt by a lighter, but her screams and cries were muffled by a cloth that was used as a gag. A rather large man came up to me and said, "We are the offenders, paying for our crimes on earth." I got out of there and ran on to the 6th gate. Gate 6 was in yet another room. A man and a woman were being stabbed, their wounds healing almost immediately, just like everyone else. Another person was being buried alive, and someone else was being hit and jabbed with a floating metal bar. I knew who these people were. Murderers, being harmed the way they killed their victims. The exit was the 7th gate, the final one. This nightmare is almost over. It's almost over, I said to myself. Gate 7. I was outside. There was a man wearing a shroud over his head coated with explosives. He blew up, regenerated, and blew up again. Another one was being beaten, stabbed by sharp metal objects, and burned by torches, lighters, and matches. They were held by people who looked like shadows. One of them came to me and said, "They are the mass murderers, the terrorists, bombers. I am a shadow of one of their victims, beating them and taking revenge for killing us on Earth." I ran to the exit. When I woke up in the morning, I became horribly scared. The images of what I saw ran through my head. In fact, that was all I could think about for the whole year. It became Halloween again, and I didn't dare go outside at night. I just went to bed. It took me a while to sleep, and when I did, I was in front of the first gate of hell. There was a teenager like me, staring at me. He was shocked to see me. My body became numb, and I could not control myself again. I said to him in a scratchy, dying tone, "Imoglu ot et neve sitag fola." I chuckled and opened the gate for him. After he went inside, with an expression that looked like he was fighting something and struggling, I looked at myself in the reflection of a goblet, filled with what looked like blood. I saw the gatekeeper. I became the gatekeeper. In fact, I am the gatekeeper. The Gurdon Light. The Gurdon Light is a mysterious floating light above the railroad tracks near Gurdon, Clark County, which was first sighted during the 1930s. Many theories and stories exist to explain the light, including one which connects the 1931 murder of William McLean, a railroad worker. The popular local legend drew national attention in December of 1994 when NBC's hit television show Unsolved Mysteries documented the phenomenon. In December of 1931, William McLean, a foreman with the Missouri Pacific Railroad, was involved in an argument with one of his employees, Lewis McBride, regarding how many days McBride was being allowed to work. During the Depression, the company did not have the option of giving McBride more hours on the job. McBride became very angry, and he began to hit McLean on the head with a shovel and beat him to death with a railroad spike maul or a spike hammer. The Gurdon Light was first sighted shortly after this murder, and many have come to believe that the light is actually McLean's ghostly lantern glowing as McLean walks the tracks where he died. Slaughterhouse Canyon. Legend has it that during the gold rush of the 1800s, a gold miner, his wife Luana, and his family lived in the area just southeast of Kingman, Arizona, in the heart of the canyon. The miner would head out every 2 weeks in search of food and gold to return with for his family. After one fateful trip, though, it is told that the miner had actually found gold, the mother lode, and he decided not to return home to his family, but to go and see the world and start fresh. Unbeknownst to him, his family relied on him more than he had ever known, and they soon began to starve. Luana, his wife, after much thought and wringing of her hands, decided she had no other choice but to end the lives of their children, thus they wouldn't starve to death. They say nowadays, you can hear the wailing and screams of the devastated mother all night long within the canyon. The Song of the Cell. As the story goes, in 1848, Alec and his wife, Betsy, both slaves, were in their home one night when their master, drunk and belligerent, crashed open the door. He attempted to attack Betsy, but Alec fought him off. Undeterred, the master chased Alec up a ladder into a loft. As the struggle continued, the master lost his balance, fell out of the loft, landed upon the floor, and died. Even though Alec turned himself in to the sheriff the next morning, explaining that what happened was in self-defense, he was still charged with murder. Par for the course in the antebellum South, really. Alec was imprisoned in the old Lawrenceville jail and later executed unjustly for the crime. People say that they can still hear his sorrowful song when they travel through the walls of the old jail. The car keys. One night, a father and his daughter were driving down a deserted country road. They were returning home after spending the entire day visiting the girl's mother in the hospital. Listening to the sound of the rain drumming on the car roof, the girl began to doze off. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and she was startled awake. The father struggled with the steering wheel, but the car skidded off the wet road and slammed into a stone wall. After checking that his daughter was uninjured, the man got out of the car to survey the damage. Both of the front tires had large punctures and the right fender was crumpled against the wall. The rest of the car had survived unscathed. "Well, we must have driven over something on the road," he explained to his daughter. "Whatever it was, it blew out both the tires." "You can fix it, right?" asked his daughter, somewhat shaken by the accident. "No," replied her father, shaking his head. "I've only got one spare in the boot. I'll have to walk back into town and find somebody to tow the car. It isn't that far from here. You wait in the car while I'm gone." "Okay," she said reluctantly, "but please don't take too long." The man could see in his daughter's eyes that she was frightened. "Sit tight, honey," replied her father as he slammed the car door. "I'll be back as soon as possible." His daughter watched him in the rearview mirror as he trudged off down the road in the pouring rain and disappeared into the night. More than an hour passed and her father still had not returned. The girl began to wonder what was taking him so long. She was very worried because he should have been back by now. Just then, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the distance, walking towards the car. At first, she thought it was her father, but when she turned around to take a closer look, she realized that it was a strange man who was dressed in overalls and had a big bushy beard. He was carrying something large in his left hand, swinging it back and forth. Something about him made her very nervous. As he approached, she stared out the back window and squinted her eyes. In the dim light, she could just make out what he was clutching in his right hand. It was a big, sharp butcher's knife. Thinking quickly, the terrified girl locked both doors in the front of the car, then jumped into the back seat and locked the rear doors. When she looked up again, she saw that the strange man had stopped in his tracks and seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the man raised his arm, and the girl let out a blood-curdling scream. In his left hand, he was clutching her father's severed head. She just kept screaming and screaming. She couldn't stop herself. Her heart was pounding, and she struggled to breathe. The grotesque expression on her father's face was horrifying to behold. His mouth was hanging open, and his eyes were rolled back in his head. When the man reached the car, he shoved his face right up against the window and glowered at her with his crazed, bloodshot eyes. His hair was wild and matted with dirt. His face was covered in deep scars. For a moment, he just stood there in the driving rain, grinning at her like a madman. Then, he reached into his pocket, took something out, and slowly lifted his other hand. He was holding her father's car keys. Thank you again for joining us for Urban Legends Volume 2. If you'd like to make suggestions for an upcoming episode, please make your suggestions in the comments on this video. We truly appreciate you. Sweet dreams.